James first saw Emily in the university library. He had stayed after class to finish a programming project, while she sat in the corner of the reading hall, engrossed in a thick album of impressionist reproductions. Her chestnut hair was tied up in a messy bun, and a faint smile played on her lips, as if she held some secret no one else could fathom. "Is that Van Gogh?" James asked suddenly, pointing at the open page. She startled and looked up. "Yes, Starry Night. Do you know much about painting?" "Not really," he admitted honestly. "Just remembered it from art class." She laughed, and in that moment he felt something strange, as if time had slowed. "I'm Emily," she said, extending her hand. "James." That was how their conversation began, one that lasted 3 hours. They talked about everything. Favorite books, she adored Nabokov, he loved Asimov. Music, she had played piano as a child. He was obsessed with rock. And dreams. Emily dreamed of becoming an artist. James wanted to build his own tech company. "Do you really think technology will change the world?" she asked, resting her chin in her palm. "It already is," he replied. "But people will still be people, with all their flaws and their beautiful moments." She smiled, and he knew. He wanted to see that smile as often as possible. Their relationship moved fast. Within 6 months, they were living together in a tiny one-bedroom apartment with a leaky faucet and creaky floors. Emily freelanced as an illustrator. James worked as a junior developer at a small firm. Money was tight, but they didn't mind. "Feast tonight," James announced one evening, bursting through the door with a grocery bag. "What'd you get?" Emily laughed. "The fanciest frozen dumplings and ketchup." They ate straight from the pot, sitting on the floor, because their only chair had broken the week before. "Someday we'll have a huge kitchen," James said. "And a whole room for my studio," Emily added. "And a hot tub. And a cat." They laughed, imagining that future, back when it still felt within reach. James proposed on the bridge where they always walked, their favorite spot. It was late fall, leaves swirling in the air, when he suddenly dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring, simple, silver, unadorned. "Are you serious?" Emily whispered. "I've never been more serious." She burst into tears and nodded. Their wedding was small but warm. Emily wore her grandmother's vintage dress, slightly altered. James wore the same suit he'd worn to his thesis defense. They celebrated with a handful of close friends, danced to acoustic guitar, and drank champagne from plastic cups. "Are you happy?" James asked, his arm around her waist. "So happy," she answered. In that moment, he was certain. This is how it will always be. 5 years passed. James got promoted, his salary multiplying. They moved to a nicer apartment, bought quality furniture, and finally adopted that cat they'd always talked about. But something had shifted. "James, you didn't even ask how my exhibition went," Emily said one evening. Sorry," he muttered, glancing up from his laptop. "How was it?" "Doesn't matter now." She walked out, and he went back to work. The scene repeated itself over and over. He buried himself in his career. She drowned in loneliness. Their perfect marriage had started cracking at the seams, but neither of them wanted to see it. Rain tapped against the window of their spacious new bedroom as James tossed and turned, struggling to sleep. In the next room, Emily's brush scraped across a canvas. She was working late again, as she had been doing more often these past months. He listened to the sounds from the studio, sharp strokes, sighs, then a dull thud. She'd thrown something into the corner. He remembered how, 3 years ago, they'd painted the walls of that room together, laughing at the splatters on their clothes. Now it held the easel he'd gifted her for their anniversary, the one he'd never bothered to see her use. "Em?" James knocked on the slightly ajar door. She turned sharply, shielding the canvas with her hand. Her face was a mix of irritation and surprise. "You're supposed to be asleep." "Can't." "What are you painting?" "Nothing special." He took a step forward, but she moved between him and the painting. A tension hung in the air, one that had never been there before. Their new kitchen had a scheduling board. Ironic, considering they'd once gone weeks without plans. Now color-coded sticky notes marked his business trips, her exhibitions, therapy appointments, her idea, which he'd agreed to for peace of mind. "Flying to Chicago tomorrow," he said at breakfast, eyes glued to work emails on his phone. "How long?" "A week. You could come if you want." He said it automatically, a rehearsed line. They both knew she wouldn't. "I've got that workshop Saturday," Emily replied, though he'd already stopped listening. Lucky, the cat they'd named in happier times, slithered between them as if sensing he no longer connected them. On their 6th anniversary, James unexpectedly suggested dinner in the city. Emily even wore that blue dress from their first date, though it hung slightly loose at the shoulders now. They walked the bridge where he'd proposed. Autumn leaves swirled just like before, but now unspoken words weighed between them. "Remember when he began. "James," she stopped, staring at the water. "I've met someone." Silence. A distant car honked. "A coworker?" His voice sounded unnaturally steady. "A gallery owner. She broke off at the look on his face. James turned and walked away, leaving her alone on the bridge where he'd once promised forever. He came home drunk for the first time in 10 years. In the hallway, he tripped over a box of her paintings. She'd already started packing. The wine glass shattered against the wall, leaving a stain on the freshly papered surface. Lucky darted under the couch. On the table lay the anniversary card he'd bought 2 weeks ago and forgotten to sign. It felt like a cruel joke now. Packing sounds came from the studio. He stood in the living room, knowing he should say something, do something, stop this. But every thought came too late. Just like all those times he could have simply asked, "How was your day?" The silence in the penthouse was deafening. James stood in the doorway of what had been Emily's studio. Now just an empty white box with rectangular shadows on the walls where her paintings once hung. The scent of turpentine still lingered, mixing with the sterile smell of cleaning products the maid had used. He knelt to pick up a forgotten tube of cadmium red paint, rolling it between his fingers. The cap was cracked. She'd always been impatient when squeezing colors onto her palette. A single drop had stained the hardwood floor near the window. He scraped at it absently with his thumbnail, remembering how she'd cursed when it happened during one of her late-night painting sessions. The refrigerator hummed to life in the kitchen, making him startle. Funny how appliances kept working when lives fell apart. James found himself outside the gallery on 12th Street at 10:45 a.m. on a Tuesday, nursing a coffee that had gone cold. He told himself he just wanted to understand. The door chimed when he entered. Emily stood near the back, laughing at something the gallery owner, Daniel, his name was Daniel, had said. Her hair was down today, the way she used to wear it when they first met. James watched as Daniel reached out to tuck a stray strand behind her ear, his fingers lingering just a second too long. He should have felt rage. Instead, there was only a hollow ache spreading through his chest. Emily turned and saw him then, her smile freezing before shattering like one of their wedding china plates he'd broken last week. James. His name sounded foreign on her lips now. "I just came to what? Beg? Accuse?" His voice trailed off as Daniel stepped closer to Emily, his posture protective. The unspoken message was clear. The storage unit smelled of dust and mildew. James sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, surrounded by the artifacts of their marriage. Here was the playbill from their first Broadway show, The Phantom of the Opera, her choice, the cheap plastic champagne flutes from their housewarming party, a dried corsage from his mother's funeral, where Emily had held his hand through the entire service. His fingers trembled as he opened her old sketchbook, page after page of early drawings, him sleeping at his desk, him making pancakes shirtless on a Sunday morning, him laughing with his head thrown back. When had she stopped seeing him that way? When had he stopped being that man? At the bottom of the box, he found the ultrasound photo. They'd been so young then, so terrified and excited. The miscarriage had been their first real loss together. Now it was just the first in a series. The divorce papers arrived by courier at 3:17 p.m. on a rainy Thursday. James signed them without reading, the pen scratching loudly in the quiet office. His lawyer cleared her throat. "There's also the matter of the apartment. Let her have it. And the joint accounts? Whatever she wants." The truth was, no legal document could divide what really mattered. 7 years of shared history, the future they'd planned, the person he'd become with her. Those couldn't be split into neat percentages. That night, James stood on his balcony, watching the city lights blur through unshed tears. Somewhere out there, Emily was starting over, and for the first time in years, so was he. James woke to someone ringing the doorbell. He lay on the living room floor, surrounded by empty bottles, his laptop still resting on his chest. The past 3 days had blurred into one gray haze. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. "Who is it?" His voice creaked like an unoiled hinge. "Delivery." He swung the door open and froze. A courier stood there, holding an enormous gilded mirror, the one Emily had bought for their 3rd anniversary. "So we can see each other, even when we're in different corners of the room," she'd said back then. Mrs. Harper requested delivery of her belongings. James wordlessly stepped aside, allowing them to bring in the mirror. It took its old place above the fireplace where it had hung for years. Now it reflected only his solitary figure and the empty apartment. The cafe by Central Park was packed, but James went in anyway. They served those almond croissants Emily had loved. He was about to take a sip of coffee when he saw her. There she was by the window, working on her laptop in a blue blouse that matched her eyes. Beside her sat Daniel's familiar leather briefcase. James turned to leave, but she looked up. For a split second, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Before she nodded politely, as she might to a stranger in an elevator. He returned the nod and realized the true horror of separation wasn't the fights, but this polite detachment between people who had once known every freckle on each other's bodies. At 3 a.m., James sat down to write her a real letter, on paper, like in their early days. "Emily, I found your hairpin under the couch today, the blue dragonfly one. Remember when you bought it at that little shop in—" He crumpled the paper and grabbed a fresh sheet. "I should have—" Another crumpled ball. "I'm sorry." By morning, dozens of failed beginnings littered the floor around him. The hairpin remained on the nightstand, a tiny, silent witness to their former life. "Mr. Harper, your table is ready." The host at the restaurant, one he'd only ever visited with Emily, led him to a window table. An empty chair sat across from him. "Will there be 2 of you?" James looked at the extra place setting, at the wine glass she'd never fill more than halfway. No. He removed the spare plate. "Just me." At the next table, a couple laughed together. James caught himself automatically checking the woman's hand for a wedding ring, an old habit he'd now have to unlearn. He ordered a medium-rare steak, not the usual, rare like Emily preferred, but how he wanted it. A first fragile step into his new life. The mirror caught the moonlight, turning the bedroom into something resembling an old photograph. James lay awake, staring at his unfamiliar reflection. Unkempt beard, hollow eyes. "You could have tried," he whispered into the emptiness, imagining her response. "Tried what?" his mind supplied. Her voice always went slightly higher when she was angry. To call. Her silk dress still hung in the closet, blue as the water in their favorite lake. James stood and pressed the fabric to his face, but the jasmine scent had long faded. Only the bitter, final smell of mothballs remained. Daniel's exhibition opened at 7. James arrived at 6:45, ticket purchased under a fake name. Emily's paintings dominated the central hall. Bold, daring, nothing like the delicate watercolors she'd once made for him. The largest piece showed an abstract heart torn apart by golden threads. The plaque read, "Severing Ties, 2023. He was turning to leave when he heard her laugh. Emily stood beside Daniel, accepting congratulations. She wore a black dress he didn't recognize. New, bought for her new life. "Are you familiar with the artist's work?" an elderly woman asked. "Yes," he murmured. Intimately. At his third bar of the evening, James dialed her number. The call connected after 4 rings. "Hello?" Daniel's voice. Silence. "Hello?" James slowly lowered the phone, but didn't hang up. Somewhere in the distance, Emily asked, "Who is it?" "No one," Daniel answered. Just silence. Sunlight woke him on the bathroom floor. His phone showed 14 missed calls from his assistant and 1 text from his mother. "Are you alive?" James turned on the tap and shoved his head under the icy stream. His reflection in the mirror above the sink trembled, like during those feverish nights when Emily would press a cool towel to his forehead. "Enough," he said aloud. In the kitchen, he threw out her favorite artist mug, ordered a new mattress to replace the one they'd shared for 7 years, opened the window for the first time in a month. The air smelled of rain and pavement, of life, which apparently went on. The digital clock glowed 3:17 a.m. when James's doorbell rang. He stumbled through the dark apartment, stubbing his toe on the unpacked moving box labeled "Kitchen Fragile." Through the peephole he saw her, Emily, swaying slightly in the yellow pool of the hallway light, her mascara smudged like charcoal dust beneath her eyes. "You changed the locks," she slurred, pressing her palm against the doorframe for balance. The scent of gin and her old perfume, the one he'd bought her in Paris, wafted through the thin gap between door and frame. James's fingers tightened around the doorknob. "You gave back your key." A silence stretched between them, filled with 7 years of unspoken words. Somewhere in the building, a toilet flushed. She sat cross-legged on his new gray sofa, the one without their shared indentations, clutching a teacup that trembled in her hands. "He proposed," she said. The words landed like a physical blow. James focused on the chip in the teacup's rim, the one from their first Thanksgiving together, when she dropped it laughing at his terrible turkey impression. "At the gallery, in front of all my new pieces." Her laugh sounded like broken glass. "He used my own installation as a backdrop, the one about severed ties." The irony wasn't lost on the crowd. James watched a single tear cut through her foundation, following the ghost of a freckle he used to trace with his lips. He said nothing. At dawn, she fell asleep in his bed. His bed, not theirs, still wearing the black dress from the exhibition. James stood in the doorway, observing how foreign she looked in this new space, like a Renaissance painting hung in a modern office. Her purse had spilled onto the floor. Among lipsticks and receipts, he saw a tube of the lavender hand cream she'd always hated but used because her mother sent it. 3 antidepressants in a silver pill case he didn't recognize. An invitation to their wedding, yellowed at the edges, tucked behind her driver's license. When his phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, "Have you seen Emily?" James deleted it without replying. She was gone when he woke to the smell of burning toast. In the kitchen, he found 2 perfectly fried eggs, the way he liked them. A note reading, "The toaster's fucked." Her engagement ring swimming in a pool of cold egg white. The apartment smelled of coffee and regret. James opened all the windows, watching early morning joggers trace their predictable paths through the park below. Somewhere out there, Emily was running too, toward or away from something he couldn't guess. On the fridge, his to-do list still hung. That blank 4th line now filled in shaky handwriting. 4. Buy new toaster. The envelope arrived on Wednesday, nestled between a pizza flyer and a water bill. The delicate Japanese paper carried the scent of sandalwood and something unfamiliar. Perhaps new perfume? Perhaps a new home. "James, I'm writing this with ink from that little shop by the train station. Remember how you laughed that it smelled like grapes? Turns out rice paper doesn't tear when you cry on it. It just warps slightly. May Daniel understand." On the back, someone, Daniel, had drawn a caricature, 2 stick figures tugging a blanket in opposite directions. Caption, "Our first collaboration." He went to buy a cactus, the only plant he trusted himself not to kill. Behind the counter stood a girl with blue hair, a nose ring, and a familiar gesture, that exact way Emily used to tuck away a rebellious strand. "Need a card? Free with purchases over $40. "No thanks." As she handed the receipt, James noticed her wrist tattoo, an exact replica of the sketch Emily had designed for their first anniversary. "Beautiful," he nodded at the ink. "Oh, this?" The girl smiled. "My boyfriend's a designer, his original work." The cactus slipped from his hands, shattering its clay pot on the floor. His therapist suggested journaling. James bought an expensive notebook and filled 3 pages. Day 14, walked past the gallery, didn't enter, didn't check her Instagram, first time in a month. Dinner, tuna pasta, didn't burn it. By day 4, he forgot to write. By day 7, the notebook became a coffee coaster. The new colleague invited him to lunch. Sarah, red-headed, sharp-witted, with a habit of squinting like she was perpetually scanning the horizon. "You still love her," she stated, splitting a croissant in 2. James meant to protest, but instead heard himself say, "She hated cherry tomatoes and salads, picked out every one." Sarah slowly extracted a tomato from her dish and set it aside. "Now you're free," she said, and it sounded less like comfort than a verdict. At 2 a.m., James woke his downstairs neighbor by playing Claire de Lune, the only piece Emily could listen to for hours. When the door flew open, he expected anger, but found only an old man in a faded bathrobe. "Next time, son," the man rasped. "Finish the song. Stopped at the best part." James returned to the piano. On the stand still sat her sheet music with marginal notes. "James snores here," and "Too sad, needs more light." He played to the end. For the first time in years, the storage facility smelled of dust and forgotten things. Boxes labeled in Emily's neat handwriting, stacked like monuments to their marriage. "Christmas decorations 2018. James's college notes. Wedding album. James opened one marked Fragile, with trembling fingers. Inside lay the ceramic mug she'd thrown at him during their last fight. Carefully glued back together, the hairline fractures visible like scars. A post-it note stuck to the handle read, "I was wrong to break things. But some breaks can't be fixed. E." His phone buzzed, a calendar reminder. Emily's birthday. He deleted it, then immediately opened a new note. Buy superglue. Fix bathroom tile. Her Spotify account still appeared in his family plan. For months he'd avoided it, until one rainy Tuesday, curiosity won. The most recent playlist, for when you miss what you've lost. Tracklist: The Scientist, Coldplay, Someone Like You, Adele, Claire de Lune, Debussy. At 3:17 a.m., he pressed play. The piano notes hung in the air like dust motes in moonlight. His finger hovered over delete account, then switched to download. The coffee shop chalkboard announced new baristas. James did a double take. The girl at the espresso machine had Emily's exact shoulder blade tattoo peeking from her uniform collar. "Americano, right?" she said without looking up. "Extra shot, no room for cream." James froze. "How did you? You came here every Thursday for 2 years with that pretty brunette." She slid the cup across the counter. "Haven't seen her lately." The steam wand hissed like a sigh. He left without adding sugar. Sarah dragged him to a physics lecture at Columbia. The professor scribbled equations about space-time curvature, then paused. "Interesting phenomenon. When neutron stars collide, they create gold, the most beautiful destruction imaginable." James thought of their wedding rings, melting down in some pawn shop crucible, becoming someone else's treasure. Afterward, at the campus bar, Sarah traced the water rings on the table. "You know why it hurts less now?" "Time dilation?" He joked weakly. "No." She caught a droplet with her fingertip. "Because you've grown around the grief, like a tree around a fence post." The realtor's brochure called it a blank canvas with stunning city views. The empty loft echoed with possibility as James placed 3 items on the freshly refinished hardwood. The repaired mug. A single key, not gold, just brass. The notebook, now with a completed 4th entry. Day 214. Bought the loft, played the whole sonata, didn't check if she listened. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the sunset painted everything in liquid gold. Somewhere across town, Emily was living her life. And for the first time since the mirror arrived, James found himself hoping she was happy. James found the box labeled Photos 2016 to 2019 while moving into his new office. His fingers left clear prints in the layer of dust. The first photo made him sit on the floor among unpacked boxes. A shot of him and Emily at Malibu Beach, her hair matted with salt water, his hand leaving a white imprint on her tanned back. On the reverse, her handwriting, "The day you stopped being afraid of the water." He didn't remember that moment, but now saw it with painful clarity. How she'd coaxed him deeper, how she'd laughed when a wave soaked his shorts. A shell pendant, a street vendor's gift, fell from the box. James clenched it in his fist until the sharp edges bit into his palm. The Yo-Yo Ma concert was an impulse decision. In Carnegie Hall's lobby, James noticed a 5-year-old red-headed boy struggling with a necktie. "Need help?" The boy nodded, serious as a conductor. James's fingers remembered the motions. His father had taught him before his first school dance. "Thank you," said a voice behind him. He turned and saw Emily. Not the Emily from his nightmares, but the real one, with a new haircut, in a dress absent from their shared history. Silence hung between them, pierced by the cello's first notes. "You listen to Bach now?" he asked. Always have, she replied. Their gazes slid to the boy, whose eyes were exact copies of her gray-green ones. Sarah's lab proved the perfect first date venue. Sterile, impersonal, with clear safety protocols. She studied organic compound decomposition. Know what happens to water molecules when they freeze? She poured liquid nitrogen into a flask. They formed perfect hexagons, the most beautiful molecular structure in the universe. James watched her red hair reflect in the steel equipment. Love is just chemistry, Sarah continued. Dopamine, oxytocin, phenylethylamine. She shook a test tube, where liquid instantly crystallized. But here's what's fascinating. Even when the reaction ends, the substance never returns to its original state. The wall map in his new office sprouted pins, blue for cities visited with Emily, red for solo trips. Today added Reykjavik, their unrealized honeymoon destination. His plane landed in a snowstorm. At the hotel, James realized he'd booked the room with that bay view, the one from the postcard in their bedroom. In the geothermal lagoon, as auroras tore the sky with green flares, a stranger swam over. Here alone, James studied his reflection, distorted by thermal currents. No, he finally answered. I'm with myself.